Vivid verses.
Marcus Webb was 34 years old, and on paper, he barely made a living. His roofing company's tax return showed $71,000 a year, a number he'd chosen carefully the way he chose everything. Low enough to keep the IRS uninterested, low enough that no lawyer would ever look at him and see a target. Every other dollar went back into the business. Better trucks, better crews, the insurance that let him bid jobs most contractors his age couldn't touch. The life that money built looked nothing like the number on his tax return. $1 million house in the Buckhead Hills outside Atlanta. His wife Renata's Range Rover in the driveway. A joint account that drained itself every month into boutiques and brunches he never saw the receipts for until his bookkeeper flagged them. On a Tuesday evening in October, Marcus decided to find out how much of that life was actually real. He didn't announce it with a slammed door or a raised voice. That wasn't how he did anything. He sat down across from Renata on the sofa she'd picked out, pale, stiff, more sculpture than furniture, and waited until she looked up from her phone. "I need to tell you something," he said. "The business is in trouble. I might lose everything." It was a lie, a good one, plausible enough that any contractor could believe it. A developer client gone bankrupt, loans called in, the kind of thing that ends careers overnight. He watched her face for the half second before she caught herself. Not fear for him, not fear for them. Her eyes flicked, just once, toward the hallway where a painting she'd spent $12,000 on was hanging. Checking, cataloging, already doing math. "What do you mean, lose everything?" Her voice wasn't soft. It was sharp, like he'd misplaced something of hers. "The house might be at risk. The cars. All of it. My car," she said immediately. "Is my car safe?" There it was. "Not are you okay? Not we'll figure this out." Her car. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He'd built his entire adult life around never needing anyone to see him flinch. "I don't know yet," he said, and let the silence do the rest of the work. He'd met Renata at a supplier's charity gala 4 years earlier. She'd been dazzling that night, talking about event planning like it was architecture. He learned later that meant she helped rich women pick centerpieces. He was a kid from the West Side who'd built a company from a used truck and his grandmother's insistence that a man who owns his ground can never be moved off it. When he married Renata, he thought he was building something with her. Instead, she'd redecorated his grandmother's furniture straight into the garage within a month. "It's dated, baby," she'd said, and replaced 40 years of solid oak with white and beige pieces that cost more than his first 3 trucks combined. He drove a Ford dusted in job site grime. She drove a Range Rover leased through the business, $940 a month, filed as a management expense, something his accountant had flagged more than once. He wore work boots that cost $120. Her closet held shoes he couldn't count, and once a receipt for a single handbag that ran $3,100, purchased on a Tuesday because she was feeling blue. That same week, he'd spent 3 sleepless nights deciding whether he could afford to give his crew a raise. None of it had ever made him angry. It had made him watchful. There's a difference, and Marcus had learned it from a grandmother who used to say that a man who reacts has already lost, and a man who observes still has his hands free. So he watched, and 8 months before that Tuesday night, he'd quietly moved every asset he could into structures a divorce court couldn't touch. Not out of paranoia, but out of the same discipline that kept his tax return low. He didn't do it because he suspected Renata specifically. He did it because his grandmother had taught him that you build your foundation before the storm, not during it. The lie about the business collapsing wasn't cruelty. It was a stress test. He wanted to see, once and cleanly, who his wife actually was when the money wasn't guaranteed anymore. He got his answer faster than he expected. Renata didn't sleep in their bed that night. She took the guest room, and Marcus let her. He lay awake in a bedroom that suddenly felt like a hotel he was checking out of, listening to a silence that used to feel like peace and now felt like a held breath. By morning, the panic had curdled into something colder. He found her on the phone in the kitchen, her back to him, voice pitched low. "I know, Priya," she was saying. "Just gone." Poof. A pause. No, of course he doesn't have a plan. He's just sitting there moping. It's pathetic. Marcus stood in the doorway and heard the word land. Pathetic. He didn't feel the sting most men would feel. He felt something quieter and more useful. Confirmation. He turned around and made himself toast instead of confronting her. There would be a right moment for a conversation. This wasn't it. That afternoon, he found her in the closet, holding a pair of red-soled heels like she was deciding whether they'd survive a fire. "We could sell the house," he offered, testing the water one more time, giving her every chance to be the partner he'd married. "Downsize. I can rebuild." She didn't turn around. "Sell the house. And go where? Some apartment? Is that what you want from me?" "It's what we might have to do." She spun to face him, and for the first time he saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear for him, fear of social erasure. "Do you know how humiliating this will be? I'm co-chairing the hospital gala. What am I supposed to tell people? That my husband failed?" Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to defend himself. He already knew the truth, and arguing with someone who wasn't interested in truth was a waste of a resource he never wasted: his own time. That evening, he overheard her on the phone with her mother, voice suddenly bright and performative. "Bryson's just going through a rough patch. You know how contractors are. Everything's fine. The house is fine." She was already writing the story she'd tell everyone. Him unstable. Her, the patient wife weathering a storm she had no part in. She left for her sister Priya's that night, saying she needed space. Marcus watched her Range Rover pull out of the driveway and felt the house go quiet in a new way. Not peaceful. Waiting. He didn't chase her down the driveway. He didn't call her to ask her to stay. A man who begs has already told the other person exactly how much power they hold over him. Marcus had no interest in handing that power away for free. That night, unable to sleep, he wandered into the living room and picked up the family iPad, the one logged into Renata's iCloud, the one she was always asking him for the password to unlock instead of the other way around. A notification lit the screen. "Priya, did you tell him yet?" His stomach didn't drop. It went cold and still, the way it did on a roof when he calculated a fall was coming and had already decided how to land. He opened the thread and scrolled to the beginning of the night. "Renata, 7:48 p.m. On my way. Can't stand being in the same house as him." "Priya, 7:49. Good. Clear head. We need a plan." "Renata, 8:15. He had the nerve to suggest selling the house. Getting an apartment." "Priya, 8:16. LOL. He's delusional. You're not giving up that house. It's your home." "Renata, 8:20. That's what I said. He's the one who failed, not me." "Priya, 8:21. Exactly. Marital property. Doesn't matter whose name is on the deed." Marcus kept scrolling, unhurried, methodical, the way he read a contract before signing it. "Renata, 9:02. My lawyer friend said possession is key. As long as I'm in the house, I have leverage." "Priya, 9:05. So you can't leave. Get him to leave. Tell him you need space, that he should go to a hotel to clear his head." "Renata, 9:10. Ooh, that's good. Make it seem like it's for his own good." "Priya, 9:12. Once he's out, he's out. Change the locks." Simple. He read the timeline they'd built. Friday morning, his meeting with his accountant, his window of absence, the locksmith, the bags packed and left on the porch to make it look like he'd walked out on his own. And then, near the bottom, the message that would stay lodged in him longer than anything else in the thread. "Renata, 10:22. Change the locks Friday. I'll call in the morning. Keep it clean. Keep it clean, like they were discussing a spill, not a man's entire life. Marcus set the iPad down on the coffee table with the same steady hand he used to set a level on a beam. He didn't feel rage. Rage was for men who hadn't already prepared for this exact possibility. What he felt was the quiet, total clarity of a man whose instincts had just been proven correct. He wasn't a broken husband anymore. He was a man who now knew, with total certainty, exactly what he was dealing with, and exactly what to do about it. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. It rang once. "David, it's Marcus. We have a situation, and I need you to move fast." He spent the next day performing exhaustion he didn't feel because letting Renata believe her plan was working bought him something more valuable than confrontation: time. He answered her texts with tired, defeated one-liners. He let her tell him, with false tenderness, that maybe he should get a hotel room for a few nights to clear his head, the exact script her sister had fed her. "You're right," he said simply. "I'll pack a bag tonight." The relief on her face was almost pitiable. She thought she'd won. She had no idea she'd just confirmed, out loud, that she was willing to execute the plan she'd typed in writing less than 24 hours earlier. That afternoon, in his lawyer's downtown office, the actual foundation of Marcus's life was laid out across a mahogany desk. Not lumber and shingles this time, but paper, and paper, David reminded him, held more weight than any roof he'd ever built. "Prenup," David said, tapping the document. "Signed 6 weeks before the wedding. Section 4B, separate property stays separate. No claims on assets acquired before marriage." He set it down and picked up an X file. "Deed to the house. Your name only 3 years before the wedding. LLC formation 5 years before. The fleet, the equipment, all titled to the company." He looked up. "She has no legal claim to any of it. None. She underestimated me," Marcus said. It wasn't bitterness. It was an observation, delivered the same way he'd note a measurement. "She did more than that," David said, sliding a printout of the text thread across the desk. "She documented her intent to commit fraud in writing sent from her own device. This isn't a messy divorce anymore, Marcus. This is a legal shutout. It kills any claim to spousal support before it's even filed." They built the plan with the precision of a construction schedule. Locksmith at 7. Process server at 7:15. A restraining order barring her from the property. Notice of the canceled joint credit cards and terminated lease on a Range Rover. A cashier's check for $10,000. Not out of guilt, David explained, but strategy. It showed the court he wasn't leaving her destitute. He was simply ending a marriage cleanly. "Movers for her things?" David's assistant asked. "Storage unit?" "No," Marcus said. "I'll pack her bags myself." David raised an eyebrow. "That's a heavy thing to carry, man." "She told me to pack and leave," Marcus said, calm as ever. "Her sister told her to pack my bags and put them on the porch. Feels right that it becomes what happens to her instead. I'll be careful. I'll be clean." He used her own word deliberately. David caught it and gave a slow nod of something close to respect. They needed a witness for the removal of the bags, so David arranged for a junior associate to film discreetly from across the street. Then he slid the divorce petition across the desk. Irreconcilable differences, with an addendum citing conspiracy to commit fraud. Marcus signed with a steady hand. There was no triumph in the moment, just the low, settled feeling of a man closing a door he no longer needed open. That night, after Renata left for her hotel clearing her head performance that was really just her waiting out the plan she thought was hers, Marcus drove home in the dark. He let himself in through the back door, the way he'd let himself into 100 job sites before dawn. He didn't rush, and he didn't take pleasure in it. Packing her 3 designer suitcases, the set worth more than most people's monthly rent, was simply work that needed doing methodical, and unemotional, the same way he'd once torn off a failed roof section to rebuild it right. Dresses, shoes, jewelry wrapped carefully in tissue, because there was no version of this where he needed to be petty to feel finished. He left the art, the furniture, everything she believed she was entitled to. He placed the bags by the front door with a sealed envelope on top, the cashier's check, the storage unit key, and a single printed note. He'd spent an hour on the wording, because words, he'd learned, were the only weapon he needed. Renata, you have until 8 a.m. to vacate with your belongings already packed. The Uber will take you anywhere in the city. Joint cards are canceled. The account is closed. The lease terminates Monday. Your text to Priya said, change the locks Friday. Keep it clean. I changed the locks. I kept it clean. Marcus. He drove to a chain hotel off the interstate, laid his 2 phones on the desk, and waited for morning without a trace of anxiety in his chest. He'd already done everything that mattered. The rest was just watching gravity work. At 7, his lawyer's associate texted, locksmith on site. At 7:05, Renata called. He let go to voicemail. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been decided. Her first message was sharp and panicked. There's a man drilling my front door. What is going on? My front door, he noted. Not our. At 7:16, process server on site. He pictured it precisely. The calm, unreadable woman handing over a manila envelope containing the end of his marriage, while Renata's whole understanding of her own life rearranged itself in real time. The voicemails kept coming, and Marcus listened to each one without his pulse changing. 7:30, furious. You bastard, you were spying on me. I'll sue you for everything. 7:42, pleading. Baby, I'm sorry, I was scared. Let me come inside, it's raining. We can talk about this. He didn't call back. Pleading was a language he didn't speak and had no interest in learning from her now. 7:55, hollow. The Uber's here. It's a black SUV. You order me an Uber like I'm a stranger. Tasha's. Priya's not answering. Where am I supposed to go? At 8:01, the final text arrived from David's office. She's in the car. Bags loaded. House secure. Marcus stood at the window of his hotel room and watched the rain streak the glass. He'd burned the life down to its foundation, exactly as he'd planned, and the foundation had held, because he'd built it to hold long before he ever needed it to. He didn't feel victorious. He felt like a man who had simply done what needed doing, without drama, without apology, and without asking anyone, least of all Renata, for permission to protect himself. The consequences arrived not as one explosion, but as a series of quiet, procedural collapses. The Uber driver's card reader declined the joint credit card twice outside Priya's apartment. Renata had to call her sister down to pay the $80 fare in cash, while the driver watched with something between pity and impatience. A small, specific humiliation that told her more about her new reality than any legal document could. Her lawyer friend, the one who'd told her possession was leverage, went cold the moment she heard about the prenup and the text messages. You put your intent in writing, she said flatly. That's not marital property law anymore. That's fraud exposure. You need a real attorney, and that's not cheap. Figure $20,000 up front. $20,000. An impossible number for a woman whose accounts had just been frozen. By Monday, a tow truck arrived outside Priya's building and hauled away the Range Rover. The lease, held by the company, terminated the moment the paperwork cleared. It hit Renata harder than losing the house. The car had been her identity, her chariot to lunches and galas, and the life she'd built entirely on borrowed status. Priya, meanwhile, received a cease and desist letter from David's firm by courier that same afternoon, formally accusing her of conspiring in the attempted fraudulent dispossession of a private residence. Terrified for her job, she told Renata she couldn't be involved anymore. And just like that, Renata's staunchest ally backed away, leaving her genuinely alone for the first time in years. The social fallout was its own quiet demolition. Word moved fast through Buckhead's tight, image-obsessed circles. Not that Marcus had failed, but that Renata had been caught, in writing, planning to steal a man's home out from under him. The narrative flipped entirely. He became the wronged party. She became the cautionary tale. The gala committee called to say, with practiced sympathy, that perhaps she should step back from her responsibilities for now. Her tennis partner stopped replying. Invitations dried up overnight. She hadn't just lost a husband. She'd lost her entire audience. And for a woman who had built her whole sense of self on being watched and admired, there was no punishment more complete than being ignored. Marcus never once picked up the phone to gloat, never sent a follow-up text, never checked in on how she was faring. He didn't need to know. He'd already gotten everything he needed the moment the last text confirmed the house was secure. Watching her unravel from a distance wasn't satisfying to him in the way people might expect. It was simply the predictable outcome of a plan she'd built on a foundation that had never actually been hers. 3 months later, the December air outside Atlanta was crisp and bright, the kind of morning that made the whole city look freshly painted. Marcus sat on his back porch, the same porch where 3 suitcases had once waited in the rain, drinking coffee from the same chipped mug he'd had for a decade. The house felt like his again. He'd hauled his grandmother's oak dining table out of the garage and refinished it himself over 2 weekends. The rigid designer furniture was gone, replaced by pieces that actually felt like they belonged to a life being lived rather than photographed. Sawdust from a bookshelf he was building himself still hung faintly in the air. His business, freed from the steady drain of Renata's spending, had posted its best quarter ever. He'd rehired his 2 best foremen the same week the locks changed, and both were now running their own crews with real raises to match the responsibility. Last week, the company had landed its biggest contract yet, a $1.4 million municipal re-roofing job, one not on the lowest bid, but on a decade of reputation that hadn't just survived the divorce, it had been sharpened by it. Beside his coffee sat a rolled set of blueprints that weren't for a paying client. His own design for a small community center back in the neighborhood, where he'd grown up, computer lab and library included, labor and materials donated. It was the kind of project his grandmother would have understood without needing it explained. He'd seen Renata once more at the final mediation. She looked smaller somehow, the expensive clothes hanging differently on her, the polish gone dull. She tried to apologize, a rehearsed string of words about being scared, about not thinking clearly. Marcus had listened without interrupting, the way he listened to everything, and then said simply, "I forgive you." He meant it, too. Not for her benefit, but because carrying the weight of what she tried to do would have cost him more than letting it go ever would. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he added, and he doubted she ever would, because he didn't think she'd ever known what it actually was. Sitting on his porch that morning, watching sunlight move across a lawn he'd mowed himself the day before, Marcus thought about what he'd actually learned. He used to think wealth was a number, a bank balance, a square footage, the size of a contract. He knew better now. Real wealth was the loyalty of men who stayed when the paychecks stopped for a week and came back the moment they started again. It was the quiet satisfaction of work done right. It was never once having to raise his voice to get what was his. The house, the money, the business, they'd always just been tools. What mattered was that he'd never once needed anyone else's permission or sympathy or approval to protect what was his. He built that certainty into the foundation years before he ever needed it. And when the storm came, it hadn't even made him raise his voice. He finished his coffee, picked up his tools, and got back to building.
Thanks for listening.